Nigeria stands to benefit a lot from a stable Ecowas and stands to lose more from a destabilized West African subcontinent. Thank you. Of democracy in West Africa. Two major high points has been one, the notice of exit by the three countries that have witnessed successful coups, Burkina Faso, Mali, and Niger, who last week, I think, or 2 weeks ago, wrote to say they are withdrawing. And they laid very serious allegations against Ecowas, which one of those is that it has not been very useful to them in their strategic fight against insecurity, as well as the fact that maybe they've not supported them in their quest for national development. Even though ECOWAS has responded that, look, the process under Rule 91 requires a year notice, but essentially they're saying we're not coming back. The second significant development is the postponement of presidential election in Senegal by Macky Sall, the president. This is very worrisome because two factors. His tenure ought to end in a few months, and without the presidential election, there will be no succession. And so the news coming from Senegal is that maybe there will be a likely extension, unconstitutional extension of his tenure. And this is the backdrop to the fact that he had struggled to amend the constitution, rather, to have another tenure, basically like a tenure elongation, and it wasn't successful. So maybe through the back door. So we've seen massive protests in the streets of Dakar. We've also seen repressive measures to maybe curtail that. All these are worrisome. For us, the Abuja School and the Safe Democracy Group West Africa considers the travel of democracy in West Africa as serious because of three factors. One, the West African sub-region is probably the poorest part of the world, as it were. Most of the poorest countries in the world, or some of them, if you look at the top 10, you see 1 or 2, 3 coming from West Africa. Secondly, it also occupies very undignified place in the list of terrorized and violent, fragile states. So if you look at the Sahel, which is where most of these countries are, Mali, Niger, Burkina Faso. If you look at the Gulf of Guinea itself, that's also troubled by terrorism, ISWA, local terrorist group, the Boko Haram, and all that stuff. And of course, some secessionist movements in the south part of Nigeria and all that. It's really a high-profile, fragile, regional region. So if you factor poverty, high poverty rate, and stagnant economic development, as you see from the GDP of much of West African states, very, very, very depressed, it means that the failure of democracy in West Africa is actually the failure of development, the failure of human welfare. So we are worried as a school that this is not just spiting ECOWAS, this is not just spiting the Nigerian government, as some might see it because of Nigeria's leading role in stopping or speaking against the coup. This is actually serious challenge to sustainability of livelihood in West Africa. So this triple action, rising poverty, rising fragility and violence, and of course decreasing economic stagnation and depression in terms of economic growth, means that this should be a prime place for focus for Africans and international people. The geopolitics of West Africa requires more democratization. And so the Abuja School wants to not just condemn this development, but also to seek for explanation. Why is democracy failing in West Africa? Some people have also noted that some of these states are French-speaking. So it's just something in the dependency between West African states and France as a former imperial colonial power that makes this resort to coups and make democracy, unstable in this part of Africa. It doesn't mean that the Anglo-West Africa have everything perfect, but we've seen notable increase, uptick in coups and radical coups like the ones that are nationalistic, arising from French West Africa. So the school, we are trying to interrogate what's the problem, what should be done. But we have resolved in this wise to set up the West African Democracy Observatory. The idea, like we did with the Election Observatory in 2023, is that this is a shaping story. This is a breaking story. It's still happening. We want to pay attention to what's going on in the West African in terms of democracy and development, and be able to help provide strategic thinking, policy ideas to help government, even train policymakers to understand what they should be looking at, to understand how they should engage. You know, we comment Nigerian diplomacy, but essentially, beyond diplomaties, the foreign policy ideas that should drive those engagements is something that we need to show up. So the school and the Civil Democracy Group are committed to trying to first understand what's going on, put it into a rational framework, see the variables driving it, and be able to offer ideas on what should be done to deepen democracy. Because essentially, this is one outcome of this is that this instability arises because of the failure of democracy itself to transform, to enable and empower the people. We are seeing failure of democracy globally, but the one in West Africa is existential, because elsewhere it creates room for dialogue, deliberation, but here it runs quickly into violent reactions, coups, counter coups, and basically diminishing the quality of life of people of West Africa. So we are focusing on accountability, on development, sustainability, innovation in thinking, saying how do we help to create policies that will strengthen democracy in West Africa, that will remove some of these push and pull factors and enable the deepening of the kind of democracy that creates development. Let me end on this note. We've also seen notable statesmen like Obasanjo recently come out and bewail the failure of democracy and say, look, maybe democracy is not suitable for us. Maybe we shouldn't have democracy. We want to interrogate these claims and ask ourselves critical questions. What version of democracy is more appropriate to West Africa? How does democracy interact with the developmental challenges, with the historical legacies, either of colonialism, post-colonialism, and so on and so forth? How do all these socio-economic factors influence the performance of democracy in Africa? So that we're not going to just have abstract discourse. We also look at the concretes that shape the outcome that we see as failure of democracy. So once again, I want to welcome all of us and to highlight that this is part of our Democracy in West Africa Observatory, which is a platform for us to continually assess, analyze, and intervene to strengthen democracy in West Africa, and to also strengthen Nigerian government's leadership of the Ecowas, because Nigeria stands to benefit a lot from a stable Ecowas and stands to lose more from a destabilized West African subcontinent.